Pawtucket School Committee work session to order at 6:33. Ms. Liss, will you please take a roll call?
Ms. Manolo.
Here.
Mr. Charbonneau.
Here.
Ms. Grant.
Here.
Mr. Knight.
Here.
Mr. Larby.
Here.
Mr. Marino.
Here.
Ms. Doobie.
Here, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First on our agenda is public participation. Ms. Liss, do we have anyone signed up?
No.
Okay, we will move on to presentations. We have two presentations this evening. The first one is RIDE School Building Authority Facility Upgrades Capital Reserves. I believe we have a couple people coming forward for this presentation. And Dr. McWilliams, do you want to address, I know Ms. Devine was going to speak during this time as well.
Yes. So our CFO, Melissa Devine, unfortunately is not able to be here this evening, but going solo is our OPM, Mr. Derek Osterman, who's going to bring to us the presentation that they both worked on. And there'll be some other items on the agenda that she was going to address that we will handle.
This is me.
Television movements.
I know. Where's our fun things?
We can have one special for
This
the
is
end.
very old school.
Yeah, this is an old school presentation. For those of you who don't know, before I was a project manager, I was an architect, and so I'm a very visual learner. And so I figured what would be really helpful this evening is just to do a little bit of a review. I bet many of you are familiar with all of this, but based on some of the questions we had had a few meetings ago, I just wanted to take a few minutes to go back through the funding process with RIDE, just to sort of level set how it is that we achieve funding, and then how the approvals come, because I think that will become very relevant as we talk about the current capital projects that are underway, as well as things that we're considering with the next round. So I have 4 sort of sketches of some general rules I want to take everybody through. And then after that, we can use them to talk about scenarios in terms of how projects are funded or any questions we may have about funding. And then, as had been mentioned, Mario is with us this evening. Prior to becoming head of the School Building Authority, was for many, many years all things funding and finance from the state. And so delighted to be able to share the floor with him, as I know he'll have answers to any questions that may come up. So with that in mind, I thought we'd start kind of way back at the beginning and just talk a little bit about the funding process and where sort of money comes for any of the capital projects that we do. So essentially, before you even get going, you've created a capital reserve that's got some bucket of money in it. And in this case, I'm saying this is cash on hand, and so it's in a blue money logo. We'll also later be talking about money in red bags. These are not cash, these are appropriations or approvals from the state. And to do any project, we have to have both a blue bag of capital and a red bag of approvals. And that'll become more clear, hopefully, as I go through this. But essentially, we begin with needing cash on hand to begin the process of entering into a stage 1, where we say, and this goes way back at this point, but we have needs, we need to do something with our facilities, and we go through this every few years, and we enter into a stage 1 and identify what those needs are. Then beyond that, after we've identified the need, we enter stage 2 and propose a series of solutions. On the back end of that, the School Building Authority's Elementary and Secondary Education Council approves what we've asked for. And typically, when we're asking for some sort of appropriation or approval to be able to do projects, historically in Kentucky, we've been asking for both bond funds and cash funds. The way the state has set this up is after you've gained approval for both debt and dollars, you then go to the voters. More often than not in Pawtucket, we've in fact gone to the voters first, and the state allows us to do that. But either way, the voter approval allows us essentially to use cash through a bond, so we take on debt. So at the end of this process, Pawtucket has capital reserves or cash on hand to do projects, as well as authorization to access cash through a bond. But that's not enough to do a project and then take advantage of state reimbursement. We also need that council approval. So we have a matching bond ledger, if you will, as well as cash. How that works in terms of the housing aid process. And if at any point people aren't following along, please jump in, because it's been probably a long time since we've talked about some of these things.
So Derek, on
Yep.
the council approval,
Yes.
it takes those two red bags of money
Yes.
and turns them into one blue bag of money.
Not exactly. So it basically takes those two red bags of money and says, theoretically, you have, I'm just going to use big numbers. Theoretically, on say $24 million bond, theoretically you have $24 million of approved spend through a bond program. But it's not real. It's only real in that the state has approved it. In order to actually have the $24 million in the bond to be able to have cash to pay people, that comes from your voter authorization. So when I do a project in the $24 million bond, I need to make sure that I have approval from the state in sort of the abstract bucket of money. And then I have approval from your voters to be actually do the project and use the dollars.
So just to clarify, theoretically, we could go to RIDE and say, we have identified these projects,
Yep.
we have proposed the solution, we are asking for you to approve $50 million.
Yes.
And they then give us the red, in your scenario, approval, and then we go out to the voters reject it, and we're still approved from RIDE, saying that technically you have $50 million that we've approved for you to spend, but you don't actually have the blue amount of money. You just have approval for something that doesn't exist at this
That's
point.
right, and that's why you always need a red bag and a blue bag to be able to do a project
For housing needs.
for housing.
Oh, Mr. Knight.
Derek, we have to get voter approval prior to asking for a bond from RIDE, do we not?
So you do not. The way that it is set up in the RIDE process, you are supposed to ask RIDE for approval first, and then you have 6 months to get voter approval. Very rarely has Pawtucket done it that way. In nearly every case in the last several cycles, you have said, no, we would prefer to go to the voters first. And so that has landed typically right after stage 1, in and around that time frame, where you say, okay, we have some needs. We know roughly what they're going to be, so let's ask the voters for X amount of dollars, and then we'll back into that when we submit our stage 2 proposal and get council.
It looks like you want to weigh in on that.
I do, and I think, and I like this example. So one way to look at this is, you have blue bags, you have red bags. You really want purple bags, which are both. So blue bags, which are just cash without approval, are a waste of taxpayer dollars because you're throwing away 91% state aid. And the reverse is true. Red bags with no cash have no value because you can't do the project. So you need to make sure, in all cases, purple bags is the goal here. So you have to, and there's ways to maneuver through that. And I think some of your questions are in terms of bonding and approval, and we'll work with you through the process to make sure that you only get purple bags. There are scenarios where communities want to do projects that are either in excess of the state. So state has these like square foot guidelines where we will only pay, it's sizable, but some communities want to go above those numbers, or they want to do projects that are not eligible for reimbursement. In those cases, you might have some blue and the rest purple, where you are willing to pay for it on your own because you really want it for whatever reason, but that doesn't mean the state will pay for it. So in all cases, we want to try to get to purple bags.
Mr. Knight?
We don't have the authority to put out for money without getting council approval. You know that, right?
Well, so you can put, what you can do is, which has happened before, you can go out to your voters for approval. The way the legislation is written, it speaks to a minimum that's state reimbursement for the funds to be unlocked. So you can have voter approval, but until you come get ride approval, those funds can't be issued. So in some ways, we're saying historically, the process has been stage 1, stage 2, General Assembly approval, voter approval is the traditional pathway. Some communities, for a variety of reasons, for timing reasons, some who aren't sure that bonds are going to pass, it actually makes sense to put the bond to the voters, and then if they reject it, don't waste your time spending millions of dollars. And so it's been done that way. But yeah, the legislation's written that they won't let you actually spend the dollars that have been approved until you come and get ride approval.
Understandable on that.
Mr. Knight?
The problem with going to voter approval after you get ride approval is the voters have the final say regardless.
That's correct.
We can put out anything we want and ask for anything we want of ride, but we're not getting the money until the legislature passes enabling legislation to put a bond on the ballot. And number 2, to put, once that's approved, then we can go to ride. We can't go to ride before that.
No, so part of the reason is this helps determine how much you ask your voters, right? So without it, you're just putting a random number and then hoping to back into it. We've had scenarios where communities who use the exact approach you mentioned have pieces of their bond that are not eligible because they can't substantiate those needs. So in order to protect that, this process is designed for you to go through, identify your needs, you create solutions to your needs, you have a final number that the state will reimburse, which then you take to the General Assembly and to voters. That's the traditional pathway.
Thank you. Mr. Sharma?
So if we can use somewhat of a hypothetical example, in a scenario where a community has an existing bond of $200 million and half of that is allocated, the other $100 million is to be allocated. But in the meantime, we're taking another pathway and looking at a far greater bond. How do we manage having a large portion of unallocated funds from our first bond and then coming out to ride in the voters for a large second bond?
That's an excellent question. So part of it, recently the school committee asked for an extension on the previous approval to help understand this. So the idea is you might have $100 million that it doesn't make sense to advance with as you explore potential other opportunities. From conversations with the district, we anticipate a stage 1 in February. If that's not is that still the case for Pawtucket potentially for another approval? Are we not sure yet? Potentially.
So there was a meeting earlier this evening where it was discussed that we were going to do what we've done in the past and look for buy-in from the group. Should we get it, Pawtucket would likely seek enabling legislation and voter approval somewhere either up here or up here, and then either submit stage 1 this coming February or coming September. But there is potentially a fairly significant voter ask on the table that's being discussed right now.
So, okay, that makes sense. So one thing to consider, and I think the one thing that may not be here are the housing aid bonuses that, depending on your projects, there's pros and cons with not handing a stage 1 in February. So if you go to vote for X amount November of 2022, the 2 most common bonuses, which all your projects have been getting, are the educational enhancements and health and safety, begins to expire that December. So that's a really narrow time frame where you'd have to get voter approval and then immediately sign a contract with the vendor within like 30, 40 days. So that's the only thing to consider. If your project includes newer and fewer or some other elements, that may not be as high risk. So Pawtucket is capped to 2 bonuses. So it's not like other communities who can get 4, you can only get 2. So if you are targeting bonuses that expire at the end of 23, then this time frame is less high risk. If you're not, if you're targeting the first 2 bonuses, this becomes much more high stakes. So something, for example, right, a $200 million bond, 10% of that with interest could be $30 million of state aid that is at risk if you miss certain deadlines. So just keep that in mind.
Mr. Sharman, yep.
And I appreciate the clarification. And has there been a scenario where a municipality has gone out for voter approval? I mean, historically, the citizens and voters of Pawtucket overwhelmingly support school construction bonds. So if they were to approve a $300 million bond for school construction, is there a scenario where we would go to RIDE with that approval and RIDE would say, we'll authorize 200 million, but we can't do 300 million?
So it's, I mean, hopefully not that extreme, but yeah, there's a scenario, and when you're picking your number, you should look at a few factors, right? Even at the highest level, there's a basic formula you should follow, which is a projected number of students times the square feet that are allowed in regulation times the approved square foot cost, which is at 551, just was published last week for high school. And then at a bare minimum, that's your number. And you know, maybe there's possibilities to maneuver through that. So East Providence, I'm trying to think of an example of one. So Cumberland a few years ago went to vote first for, I think it was 80 million, and the state approved 76 million. So they didn't substantiate the full amount. So there is a possibility that were to occur. The reality is you have so many buildings and so much need that I'm sure that if we write this legislation in a certain way, that it's potential to have projects everywhere. So even if you couldn't substantiate all the value at your high school, you have needs in all your other elementary schools and your middle schools. Like, the numbers just keep going. So the risk is less in Pawtucket than it would be in a community with just 3 schools.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Knight.
What happens to the bond that's already been approved for Shea and Potomac? What happens to that money?
So the nice thing is, until you issue it, there's no expiration date. It actually, this is one of the unique things of Rhode Island, where the moment you issue the debt, you have up to 5 years to spend it, or you run into financial repercussions. If you don't issue debt, you can then, depending on how the voter, and I think this past bond was district-wide, so you have maximum flexibility. Up until the moment you issue it, the clock doesn't start, and you are able to cross funding streams with approval. So that's been done before. Cranston, who did that Eden Park project you may have heard of, they were actually able to cobble together, it was like 3 or 4 voter approvals from the last decade that hadn't been used to fund this project. So there is precedent already where you can cobble together approvals with funding. I do also, since I'm already here at the microphone, I do have good news to report for Pawtucket. So the facility equity initiative applications, which the district sent in, were scored this past week. I can't tell you the project yet because it hasn't been approved yet, but over $2.5 million will be given to Pawtucket to improve your schools, 100% state funded, which is hard to beat. So that's some great news. A couple of things, make sure that you can do these as fast as possible. So there's for 2 reasons, right? Number one is you want these spaces improved by the beginning of next school year, as was committed in the applications. Number one, so that the students can see the impact. But we've put in requests in both RIDE's capital budget and the governor's recommended budget to make this a permanent funding stream moving forward. And in order to ask for more money, we need to spend what we have. So congratulations on that. You guys had some of the best applications from anyone. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Knight.
The 2 high schools that we've put in for them to be renovated as high schools, we've got that money sitting there as a bond that's approved. You're telling us we don't have to use it, but you're telling us we can't repair either one of them to be either the high school or the middle school. What do we do with that money?
Well,
We let it expire?
Well, the money hasn't been issued yet, so it doesn't exist at the moment. You just have authorization.
That was our decision.
No. So I think there's 2 items here. So some bonds will be issued this June to pay for winters and some of the work that's
That's
on.
fine.
That's
What
correct.
about
Mr.
Shea?
Knight, can we let?
Yeah, so again,
He's not answering my question.
no, so, sorry, if you allow that, you have voter authorization. That doesn't mean that's 1 bond. It could be 4 bonds, it could be 2 bonds, right? But you have the authority and the ability to issue as needed. There's actually strategies for issuing, because until projects complete, the state won't pay housing aid. So it doesn't make sense to issue funding ahead of time so that Pawtucket voters are responsible for paying this without state aid. We want to avoid that. So part of this process here is to be strategic with your funds so that you're not just issuing it just to issue it, and then you're responsible for paying the debt service when you can wait, see if something larger is possible that would be better for this community, and then combine those resources in a prudent way. That's the thought process.
Mr. Knight.
Okay, you're still not coming up with the answer that I'm looking for. Why aren't we started on the work on Shea, which the work we've approved originally was for a high school, but if we decide to use it as a junior high school, it's the same work that has to be done. Why haven't we started it?
Yes, that's not a question for the state.
I'll at least add some context to that, and then you may be able to add. So, in terms of, there's a number of different ways that we work through the housing process, which I want to talk about, but the questions that are being brought up now really go to where the approvals are, what we have in terms of state approvals, this authorization bucket, and then the blue bucket of the actual money. So what I believe Mr. Knight is asking is essentially within the $220 million bond, and actually this is an example where our voters approved $220 million, that's real, that should say 220 bond authorization locally. The state cut that back to 209, which we're perfectly fine with. And so that is an example of a slightly different funding allotment. But I think the question here is we are approximately tapping into, in terms of the bond plus capital, 100 million of the bond authorization for RIDE plus approximately 100 million of our local authorization to create a purple bag to do both Baldwin and Winters. The remaining 100 million, both in authorization from the state and locally, was to address Shea and Poland. So the question is, why are we not proceeding with, I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Shea? And the answer coming back from RIDE is, if you were to proceed with Shea as you had planned and renovate it as a high school, and you weren't having other conversations over here, then yes, we pre-approved that and you may proceed. However, if the conversation has switched to, you'd like to keep that facility, but perhaps it becomes a middle school because we're doing something else with your high schools, we do these approvals in the red bags from RIDE come with very specific stipulations. So they basically, in that 200 million, they say 50 million for Winters Elementary, 50 million for Baldwin Elementary, approximately 50 million for Shea High School, and 50 million for Tolton High School. When that 50 million becomes Shea something else, all of a sudden the red bag goes away, and we no longer have authorization from the state piece, so our local piece.
Why haven't we pursued authorization?
So we had the conversation with the state, and they had indicated until we made a decision about the high school, they would not proceed with us.
Did we approach that it could be used as either a middle school or a high school?
We did.
And they said they didn't want to do it.
They said that they were unwilling to continue with that project until we knew for sure what it was going to be. They felt that the renovation required would be substantially different in terms of the academic program between what is expected in a middle school and what is expected in a high school is the feedback we got.
Does anyone else have any questions? I know Mr. Knight does, but Mr. Knight.
Okay, this is for, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
Mario?
Well, I wasn't going to call you Mario, but that's all right. This is for Mario. If we have identified that that school needs electrical work, air conditioning work, heating work, regardless of whether it's a middle school or a high school, it needs that work. Why are we just saying, sorry?
No, it's a great question. I think part of it is, so there's a level of health and safety items which you're describing, which
That's exactly what I'm saying.
those, in that case, you wouldn't want, so here's the real risk. If you invest bond funds in a building that you end up, oh, we don't need it. After you invest it, the state stops payments, but your debt service payments continue. So that's where, if you have capital reserve funds, what you do, there's nothing to recoup. So if there are health and safety issues in those buildings, I would suggest that you use your local capital reserve funds to repair them. You submit for reimbursement and we'll reimburse you. If the building's closed, we don't come back for that funding. So that's one thing. Our hesitation with investing large sums of money in these two buildings is the future's uncertain. If you had a plan saying we're going to do this, this, and that, and it was very clear that one of the buildings was going to become a middle school, you could advance right now with it. But at the moment, it sounds like the plan is not set in stone. So why would we invest the limited dollars we have in something that we may not use? Like that's the hesitation when the state's paying 91%.
Well, that was never brought to the school committee for approval, number one, when we could say we're going to make it a middle school in the future, or that we were going to stay where Shea is. As it stands right now, we're stuck in a quagmire, not doing anything to that building, and our students are unsafe in that building. We're supposed to be making it safe. Either way, if we get started with this, it's safety and health improvements, regardless of what it's being used for, because that building is required to be a school site.
I'm just saying, don't use your bond for a building that may close. Use your local capital reserve.
We don't have the money to use the capital reserve.
You've done capital reserve projects over the last 5 years.
How much do we have?
Yes, Mr. Charbonneau.
I just, for the record, I disagree with Mr. Knight that our students aren't safe at Shea. I think we recognize that there's improvements we can make there, but I'd be very careful of saying just a blanket statement that our students aren't safe there, because I don't believe that to be the case. And I believe that this committee has seen to it to do necessary upgrades at Shea and throughout the district to ensure that our students are safe when they go. So I just wanted to be on the record for that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Dr., do you want to continue your presentation? Because I think some of these questions about capital reserve are in the end of your presentation.
Yeah, so some of this I think will answer itself as we go. So if people are fairly comfortable understanding the difference between a blue bag and a red bag, and if we merge them to get a project, we'll get to this in a minute, which is kind of the lifetime of your approvals. I just wanted it before you. But in terms of some of the highly technical stuff in terms of how we actually execute on this financing and how we use your capital reserve and where capital even comes from to be able to do all of these projects, I wanted to talk a little bit about the housing aid process. So as Mario had mentioned, by right, you are only paying 17% approximately on any given project. The state is kicking in the remaining 83%. When the general obligation bond was passed, it allowed communities to take advantage of bonus points. Because your housing aid percentage is already so high, because it's already paying so much, the most you can do is split the difference between where you are today and 100%, which means that the maximum the state will pay on any given project is 91%. Colliers' job is to make sure that you get 91% on every project, so that you're only paying 90%.
And can you clarify when that expires again?
So the first two bonuses begin to expire December 30th of 22 for any work that hasn't started.
Hasn't started.
So as long as you start it, you have 4 years after the fact. So some of, that's why that early on we talked about process. If you are going to engage the voters in November, you'd want to make sure, well, that either that your plan qualifies for some of the 4 bonuses that expire December 30th of 23, or that you have a contract in place by December 30th of 22 to lock in to those, so you can get 91% reimbursement from the state.
And there are a number of things that we're doing, even if we miss that first expiration date, to take advantage of other bonuses that are still available another year into the future in terms of timing. And there is also proposed communication to the General Assembly about requesting an other really important piece of kind of our money, our cash, and our bond, locally approved physical dollars versus RIDE's 83% and sort of approval and hypothetical dollars is when we are doing a capital reserve project, we're blending their approval on cash and ours, but we have a multitude of ways to actually get reimbursed our 83 or 91%. We can do it in a traditional method where there's a schedule and it says if your project is so big, you get paid back in a year or 2 years or 3 years, and it slowly just cycles the money back to you. More recently, RIDE has been trying to accelerate that to get your money back faster, even within the traditional method, but that's the first method, and we use that sometimes, but honestly not that often. One of the things that the former administration had done under Governor Raimondo is said, we know that communities throughout the state want to do big projects with lots of cash. So even if we move back to our $32 million bond, when we asked for that, we asked for $32 million of bond authorization and $14 million of cash authorization. But I'm fairly certain the day we asked for it, Melissa wouldn't be able to tell you she had $14 million of cash sitting around. But what she could tell you is, if I only have to pay project, I just need to be able to survive long enough to get paid back. So I'm only paying my little piece. And so one of the first programs that the state put out was the Shovel Ready program, where there was essentially a grant through a payback method where each month we'd get our bills in, each month we'd submit them to the state. The state would immediately refund you their portion of the money. So you only needed cash flow to support your little piece as the projects progressed. And that historically has allowed you to do a ton of capital reserve projects with cash that you would not have necessarily known you had. Because the state has come in with so much money as the bills are due, that you're able to do more than you would otherwise. Does that make sense so far?
Yes. Oh, Mr. Charbonneau.
But, so, and not to get off topic too far, but if we look at the proposed Central Falls High School and their funding mechanism, in essence, they're just pulling their housing aid forward, correct? So there is no reoccurring.
Yeah, so in their case, they receive special legislation. So normally you issue your bond, you complete the project, you make your debt service payment, and then the state reimburses you right after you've made it. Central Falls didn't have the resources, even though at 98% reimbursement, they couldn't even make a single payment and wait 1 day to get state aid. With a city budget of 16 million, the debt service payments would approach that. So in their case, this past summer, they received special legislation where the city will issue with their one bonus, it's about $2.8 million bond, and the state will issue the rest of it as on the state's books, so that there's no housing aid transaction. The state puts up its money, Central Falls puts up its money, and they can complete their work.
But that is not that's not the state's preferred.
That's the only one that on record that has gone that way.
Okay.
Ideally, that would be the case. I know Woonsocket's interested in looking at that because they are unable to issue 100 million for the really high share communities. Even though you have a high reimbursement rate, reimbursement only works if you have the resources to then claim your reimbursement. So Central Falls, for a period of 10 years, didn't submit a single project for housing aid. Think about that. That's hard to believe. Woonsocket, since 2007. So you've received, look at all these approvals you've received there. Since 2007, Woonsocket has received $6 million of approval one time. They didn't even use it all. So the rules for some communities, right, need to be changed, and we'll see if you need some special legislation, perhaps you can engage your reps to do it. But it's only been done for Central Falls. Woonsocket is going to make a case for it because of how desolate things are over there. But normally, in all other cases, is you issue your debt, you complete a project, and then we reimburse you annually on your payments.
Yeah.
Mr. Knight, do you want to finish a couple other ones, or do you want to ask a question?
I got a question.
Okay.
I didn't mean to imply that Shea is unsafe, but it needs upgrades, safety and security upgrades. at the point that we're at, we've got, at this point, 83% approval rate from payback rate from the state of Rhode Island, RIDE. And every year that has to be reauthorized by the state legislature?
No.
Since when?
Since 2018, they changed it. So at the time of approval, your rate is locked in for the 5 years. So you have that memorandum of agreement, which was signed between the school committee and RIDE, that locks your reimbursement rate at the moment you were approved. So historically, is what you're saying is correct, where that was reevaluated, and at the time of completion, you knew your reimbursement rate. For planning purposes, that doesn't make sense. Obviously, some communities like Burrillville have these wild swings in reimbursement rates, so it was impossible to issue debt and then have any confidence of what rate the taxpayers were going to have to repay. So that changed in 2018. So we know your rate for the next 5 years is locked in.
Thank you.
Yes. So among the other methods, and part of what Mr. Shelno was talking about was if we were really talking about a bond project, traditional method, the community would take on everything, pay everything out, and the state would slowly pay back, but we would need the capital on hand to first pay everything before that came in. And really, especially on the cash side, all of these other programs have been what has enabled us to do more with less because the cash is coming faster. And more or less what's happening in Central Falls is the cash is coming in faster. So after the shovel-ready program ended, it was more or less replaced by PAYGO. You know, a slightly different program, but same idea, where you were granted up to a certain amount of PAYGO dollars, or essentially shovel-ready dollars, to be able to submit invoices every month, have the state pitch in their piece, you pitch in yours, and pay together as you go, PAYGO. The newest, with PAYGO nearing the end of what is available in the first $250 million bond that was approved, it's held by the state side, which is how the state was able to actually come up with the money to engage in this program. They put together the Facility Equity Initiative, which is targeted communities that are likely to need this type of assistance. Correct, Mario? And so can you tell us a little bit about the communities that were even eligible?
Sure. So that was limited to 5 communities: Pawtucket, Providence, Central Falls, Woonsocket, and West Warwick. We had an application process. For this funding in particular, the idea was not health and safety, because that's typically whatever gets done at all in these communities is just health and safety. And then you walk through some of these buildings. For example, you know, I have them on my phone, but Central Falls, you see these TVs in every room they're like from 89. They're in every room. They're deeper than they are like the screen. People just walk by them every day, don't even notice them. You see the science labs in Woonsocket are desolate. And I mean, I'm sure there's spaces here that in some of your schools are awesome, but some of the schools that you haven't gone to yet, I'm sure we have cases here as well, which is why many of your projects were picked. And same with Providence, we have spaces that are not conducive to teaching and learning. So the focus on this fund was to prioritize educational enhancements, because we know you always get to, so I know that the most pressing health and safety issues always get fixed, right? They will get fixed. You have a duty to do that. But you may never get to, so again, in Central Falls case, there wasn't a single smart board. There were all these marker boards and chalkboards, right? I mean, we're in 2021. We have TVs that don't even work. And then at the same time, we took them, and I want to thank you also, because we took districts on tours to both Potter Burns and Nathaniel Green in the month of November. We took Providence, we took Central Falls and Woonsocket. Potter Burns, Nathaniel Green, we took them to Eden Park, and then some spaces in North Providence. And you know, the nice takeaway about your projects was how cost effective they are. Like in terms of return on investment to outcomes, you can't beat Potter Burns. You really can't. And Nathaniel Green as well, I think it is amazing. But the big difference is you go to these schools, even in North Providence, they have these 70-inch TVs that were all being used in the elementary schools. And then you go to some of the other schools, and it's not the same playing field. So that's the idea behind this fund, is to try to correct some of those inequities that exist in our state, so that every kid has a safe, clean, and educationally appropriate school facility. The other thing, since I have the mic as well, is so this year, because of the influx of federal dollars, we have been pushing communities, especially high share ones, to create what's known as the revolving capital fund. So the idea behind that is, if you can find money at least this one year and you put it in a reserve fund and complete projects that receive housing aid, you get 91% back, which you complete work, get 91% back, complete work. So in Providence's case, and I can create one list for you as well, they have the same reimbursement rate. So that's why I know this is, for them, it's an 11-to-1 return on investment. Same with Pawtucket. So every local dollar is matched by 11 state dollars. That's hard to beat. And in their case, they're able to cobble with the city and with their own resources. They're going to invest a one-time of $8 million, which will allow them to finish. It's over $54 million over a 10-year period. And then they still end up with like $5 million in reimbursement at the end. So for a net cost of $4.5 million, they're going to do over $54 million of work. So this is something that there's an abundance of dollars, both in the city and here in Pawtucket, that this might be able, if you can seed this pot once, you can just repair projects on state dollars. So that's something to consider, that many are doing that. I'd be happy to create a flyer for you. I've done it for 4 or 5 communities, and many are trying to do it because it's a great mechanism that's severely underused. So with bonding, the issue with bonding is that it increases the project cost by 40 to 50% because of interest. Even though the state's paying for most of it, it's just overall. So as a result, 35 to 38% of all housing aid is just for interest reimbursement. It doesn't even pay for projects. So there's an incentive for both the state and the communities. If we can avoid financing costs and shift more to either this PAYGO or your own capital reserve or some other upfront funding mechanism, everyone wins because more dollars go towards projects instead of going to banks. So,
Mr. Charbonneau.
Mario, the revolving capital fund, is that different from our existing capital fund?
So in some ways, so the revolving component is because statute requires housing aid to be paid to the city. So they don't technically have to give it back to you. I think Pawtucket, for the most part, you have a good relationship, relatively speaking, with your city, so that if you complete a capital reserve project, they will give you back those funds. It does not exist in most communities.
Yeah, that is true. So by and large, that's what's happening, and that's how we've been able to say at the $32 million bond, $14 million in cash, at the 24, $12 million in cash, and 220, we were projecting we could do $25 million in cash. Is when we are doing capital projects, they're tracked separately by Melissa, and stating that does comes back to the school side of the ledger, and to the best of my knowledge, and she would need to be here to basically triple check this. That is essentially what's happening. As this reimbursement comes back, she puts it back into what you see every year as the capital fund.
Mm-hmm.
So they always have a couple $1 million or whatever it is at the beginning of every year to roll and continue to do these projects.
But Mario, you're saying that you could get us information about how we could codify that's exactly, even though that's already what Pawtucket, as you were saying, you want to triple check, but that is what Pawtucket is currently doing. That is it a new program, or is it just
part of it is to codify it. So it works now, but in a different election, it may not work in the future. So with Providence, they're actually looking to create a formal agreement so that this gets deposited in its own fund, and it just goes. Like in their case, after the first year, you're only using state dollars to fix your building. So it makes no sense to actually stop it from going.
Mm-hmm.
I can send you the whole package we've sent them for you guys to consider and look at, but
yes.
I know that for the most part, it's been Joanna always sends it over, but the next Joanna may not send it over, and the next mayor may not send it over. So it's good to have this, especially now. You know, the challenge with a lot of these communities is that they've never had even the money to begin this fund. With all these federal dollars, you might be able to free up some money one time to see this, have a formal agreement, and then you literally just rely on state dollars to repair many health and safety projects and other projects throughout your district.
And so then if we go to the bond side,
I'm sorry, Mr. Knight.
I just have a question on that bottom figure that you got under facility equity initiative. What is it? What is it?
That's what Mario just shared.
Yeah, but he didn't tell me the number.
Oh, yeah, so Mario has indicated that you will find out very shortly that you've been awarded up to $2.5 million in this red bucket, in this new PAYGO bucket. So as we are planning capital projects, and I think we had to submit the specific projects under this program, and there's a chance, I believe we get total on
That's correct. So for these, as long as you commit to 15% minority business enterprises, which so the statute of 10% you have to do anyways. If you do just 5% over that, the state will pick up the whole tab. So there's an incentive to really seek them out.
How much is that again?
So
$2.5 million.
50 or 60%?
No, 15.
15, okay.
Yeah, so state law is 10, so if you just go 5 above, yeah, 60 would be high, but
Okay, I didn't hear you.
just 5% more than that, you get your entire share waived. So it's really, you're really incentivized to make it happen. We worked with our partner, yeah, we worked with our partners at the state agency. One of the requirements we'll have, which will help you meet this, is when you go out to bid, that you also send it to the ODO, Office of Diversity, Equity, and Opportunity at the state, so that they can send it out to vendors as well, which will help you meet that percentage.
And during that office has been great with you. Excellent partners. On the bond side of the house, very similar. We touched on this a little bit. Traditional method. We bond the whole thing. We pay the whole thing. The state pays back cyclically each year. It's tied to your debt service schedule, and you have to float everything up front. A portion of that is now offered through PayGo. So if we needed, I'm going to just make up a number, if we needed $100 million in bonding, and the state says, no, 10 of that I'll give to you in cash, so that you would have need to bond 90. And whenever we have planned in our bond blue and red bags, some of that can go to cash. The idea behind the PayGo program in this way was, in some cases, the general obligation bond for $250 million that the state is carrying, it's carrying it at a lower interest rate than some municipalities. And so to Mario's point earlier, if there's a way for the state to pay less interest, less money directly to banks, more money into projects, that's what they like to do. So that's what that's about. And it's meant as a means to reduce how much money you have to carry on your books over 20 years as part of a bond. So those are, and this is why the other evening where many questions were coming in, and I'm happy to kind of keep these on hand, but often I would kind of have to take any scenario through this process with you and say, well, this is how we did it, this is where we got to, and this is the funding schema, because it changes on every project in terms of which blue bag we're using and which red bag we're using. And then the last thing that I just wanted to review, because it had come up, is just the life of any given project, because I think this is really important. And again, these aren't things that we've talked about in a long time, because they're just sort of the general rules of the road, but I think it's worth a refresher. So any project that comes through gets approved by you no less than 6 times. So essentially, we put projects forward or an idea forward when we submit a letter of intent, the idea that we're going to be seeking funding. We then submit a stage 1, and you approve there. You again approve during stage 2. When we're identifying the funding sources, we talk about that, and we talk about how the project is coming together, whether it's going to be a capital or a bond project. We then go out to bid and have to hire the design team to actually execute that project. And then again, we bid the contractor or the CM, which in some cases is a series of bids, like we're going through now with Winters, to finalize the rest of it. And so I thought that was just kind of an important refresher as well, is by the time we're really into spending any money on any project, you have seen it multiple times, and it's just going back to when did we seek authorization, which buckets is it coming out of, but we're bringing forth everything over the life of the project, basically. So I'm happy to take any questions. I know Mario is. That sort of concludes sort of my rules of the road presentation, but I'm happy to sketch out examples or whatever you need.
Well, I want to start by thanking you I know that this came up about a month ago and there were a lot of questions, and at least for me, this is very informative. I think that maybe this was done 5 years ago for me and I didn't understand it back then, but I feel like I understand it now, and I really appreciate the RIDE representative, also Mario, for coming to help us work through this. But at this point, other people who do have questions, and I'm asking, I don't know if one of our assistant superintendents could just take a picture of this that we could then get sent out to the committee. I appreciate the going off book and old school, but I do know my college students are always snapping pictures of the board, so I figured that's where the idea came from. So if we could just get a couple pictures that we could have sent out to the committee, that would be great. While Ms. Ramsey is taking excellent pictures, does anyone have any questions? Mr. Knight.
Okay, So what we're saying is what we spend in capital reserve funds, we're getting back 90% at this point.
Generally speaking, between 83 and 91%.
Okay. What is our capital reserve fund right now?
So I would need Melissa to tell you the exact number, but essentially the process that I'm describing is when you're reviewing the budget as you do each year, and there's a capital reserve fund, and it's probably never typically very big, maybe it's $1 million, maybe it's $2 million. That is being used just to pay your portion, and the state reimbursement is coming in as quickly as it can to pay its portion, and wherever possible, it's being rolled back in to ensure that you continue to have capital funds to do future projects. But I need Melissa for your audited financial statement today.
And just to clarify on, so say we're doing a $10 million project, but we don't immediately spend $10 million. So if we are spending $1 million on X, we expend the money out of the capital reserve, and then we get back whatever, 91%, exactly, yes. And we get back that money, and then we almost immediately again spend the money and then get back 91%. And through the process, we do with $1 million or complete an entire $10 million project just in these kinds of like, and that's what you're talking about, that cyclical, that Pawtucket, as you said, is currently doing, and RIDE is looking to codify that this process should be an exact cycle where the money just goes immediately back into the capital reserve instead of there's currently a step in between.
Yeah, and so the other thing, we've also on the state side have, in order to encourage us, we've tried to streamline the reimbursement cycle. So historically, $1 million project, you'd be reimbursed over a 5-year period. So that works for Barrington, and that works for Lincoln. That doesn't work for Woonsocket, doesn't work for Pawtucket. So now we've changed it, so projects $1 million or less, you get reimbursed in 1 year. So if you finish by June 30th, you get half your reimbursement September 15th, and the other half on March 15th. And the idea is that you'll know those are the 2 payment dates in statute, so we always pay half on each of the days. And as a strategy, if you keep your projects to $1 million or less, you get it back within a year. So you can quickly, you could do a bunch of $1 million projects. It's not $1 million total, but you might have $7 million projects in all your buildings, and you'd get reimbursed, $6.7 million. Yep.
Okay.
Just they're speeding it up, but that's the traditional method. These are instant.
The shovel ready and the pay-go are instant.
Right, as will be the
Okay.
facility activity.
Yeah, that's the trade-off. So with those funds, the moment you have an invoice, you send it in, and we'll pay you. Sometimes as fast as the same day, which is unheard of for the state. For housing aid, which is the primary funding source, it's once a year, and it's on project completion, not as you go. So even if you're 80% done, if you miss that deadline, you have to wait a year and then send it in the next summer. So that's the one thing with that. You want to make sure that you pick smaller projects, can hit those dates, so you can always get your reimbursement September 15th and then on March 15th.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. I want to thank you so much again for this very detailed presentation, and I look forward to those pictures and reviewing them. And I appreciate the purple buckets. Ms. Vanillo.
I have one question, and I'm not sure. The Fba loans that we took, where does that tie into all this? Or does it not?
Yeah, so this loan was a little bit older, and I'm probably gonna need Melissa to completely answer, but I believe it may have been way back in 2016. I think we had 4.685 million, something like that, to work with. 2.865 was traditional, 2 million was a loan, and that went through, I believe, but again, I want your CFO to
I think that was paid in full already, so that's off the books. But the reason for that was the reason behind that concept was many communities didn't even have their 17% to do, so we would lend you the full amount and then you would slowly repay your piece. But Pawtucket was able to pay it ahead of time, which is good. So you saved any interest that you were going to pay on that. You cleared the book. So I think only Providence remains. I think there was 3 who took it that first year that we did it, and then North Providence paid it off, Pawtucket paid it off, and Providence still remains.
So that's not a process you're going to go back to, is it?
It depends. So there is talk, and so the other piece that's on here is the unknown of what will come this next session. So we know that there's already talk of another school construction bond with rules to be determined. There's talk of a larger SBA capital fund, which with rules to be determined. There's talks of making the facility equity initiative permanent and larger and expanding to other communities. So it's a good time for school construction. There's a lot of buckets of money. The first we'll know in mid-January with the governor's recommended budget what the landscape holds, and then again in June when the General Assembly passes their budget, we'll know some of the new rules and some of the new buckets that will exist. But I imagine that we will see perhaps a third column this summer. I'm envisioning that we will have new sources, which is good news. Can I just acknowledge someone who I wish that she was here, but we work with a lot of districts throughout the state, and I can tell you with certainty that Melissa Devine is a top 3, if not the best business official in the state of Rhode Island. I can tell you that, and I would like to acknowledge that her, and I wish she was here so I can make her face turn red, but I know she's at home today. So thank you for your time. It's great to be here in Pawtucket. Thank
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So we'll let Derek take down his sticky notes. And we'll move on to Gilbane Winter's presentation.
Good evening. I am Cheryl Ben. I'm the project manager from Gilbane at the Winters construction site. This is going to be anticlimactic. I don't actually have a presentation tonight. I'm just here to notify you. We're aware of the city's construction noise ordinance, which is from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And during our concrete placement activities, concrete goes long. So we've currently placed our 2 largest slabs, square footage wise, and we ended at 9:30 one evening and 7:30 the other. Actually, sorry, 9 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. So we have been skirting the 10 p.m. noise ordinance, extend past. We don't expect it to happen. I'm just here to notify you that we may go a little long with our concrete.
Ms. Grant.
So if we do exceed that, does anyone know on our end what repercussions, or would we get are there any repercussions on our end from the city, like penalties or fines? If so, would these be things that Gilbane would take in? And
Ms. Colliers or Gilbane, are you able to answer this question if the city is aware of this possibility?
I don't believe there are any fines involved. This is a standard practice for the East Providence High School. They went through this, and the North Providence schools. It's a very typical construction activity. I'm just here as a courtesy to notify that we may go long. I wouldn't expect that we do. It's a slim chance that we do. If there were any repercussions, Gilbane would certainly step up to address them. I'm not sure what they may be.
There is
Mr.
a
Knight
chance,
and then Mr. Charbonneau.
there is a chance that you could face a zoning violation hearing, which does lead to, or could lead to fines. We can't abate that. It has to be done by the city.
Mr. Charbonneau.
I would ask that you reach out to the district councilman. I believe that's Councilman Wildenhain. Make him aware and ask for his guidance, his input as to if we should address it with the city or if notification of Councilman Wildenhain is sufficient. But I think we should reach out, that there's the potential for this to occur. And it may or may not. And I would ask that we reach out to the district councilman.
Mr. Moreno has indicated that he will make that contact.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
you.
Okay, we'll move on to approval of previous meeting minutes, 10/28/21 and 11/4/21. Then a motion to approve the minutes by Mr. Knight, been seconded by Mr. Moreno and Ms. Grant. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to old business discussion action items. A, remove from,
Take it off the table.
there's been a motion to take the golf roof replacement off the table by Mr. Knight. It's been seconded by Mr. Moreno. Discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We are now on to approval of golf, partial roof replacement and fire code upgrades. Colliers?
Good evening.
Hello.
First, I want to congratulate Pawtucket on the Facilities Equity Initiative. That's great, so congratulations. Going back to golf, so the Pawtucket School Department is in receipt of golf proposal, as you may have seen that. It's for partial roof replacement, just to be clear here. And Colliers recommends, after reviewing the proposal, the attached proposal, the approval of the aforementioned proposal for the fixed fee of $158,000, $355.
Was an approval.
There's been a motion to approve by Ms. Moreno. It's been seconded by Ms. Bonolo. We are now in discussion. Mr. Knight and then Ms. Grant.
Have we submitted for reimbursement on this project?
We will.
Ms. Grant.
So I noticed that we're going to be doing, it looks like there's going to be some work done on the skylights and things like that. How will this affect the school building? And will kind of like Curvin, will there be off hours so the students are not disturbed?
Great question. I was going to mention one thing actually, so thank you for your question. So this project is supposed to be done during construction during summer 2022, which is this coming summer, where the students are out. So as we all know, the construction industry is still a little bit a challenge in terms of the lead time issues. So we have been, and continuously we are, in constant communication with the roof suppliers and consultants, and we've been told that this is still a stress in terms of lead time in materials acquisition. So by the end of the design process, we will be reviewing with the district about the feasibility of going out to bid for construction for this summer. Just in case the industry is still doing the same for 2022, we may end up doing this in the construction for the summer 2023. Just it's up to the industry year. And we will be presenting and updating you about the project by the end of this design process.
Mr. Charbonneau.
So just to be clear, Deanna, this is just to design the roof work. This is not the roof construction. This is nothing.
Design
it's just
services.
design.
Correct.
And the goal is to do the actual construction in the summer of 22?
2022, yes.
Okay.
I really appreciate the picture too. I had no idea that that's actually what the top of that roof looked like. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, Ms. Liston, please take a roll call.
Ms. Bonolo.
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau.
Yes.
Ms. Grant.
Yes.
Mr. Knight.
Yes.
Mr. Larby.
Yes.
Mr. Marino.
Yes.
Ms. Doobie.
Yes. Motion carries unanimously. Our next item is to remove from the table school committee policy, first passage, ACE, policy regarding accessibility of district programs and activities.
Was removed.
It's been a motion to remove it from the table by Mr. Moreno. It's been seconded by Mr. Larby. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion to remove from the table carries unanimously. We are now on approval of school committee policy first passage, ACE, policy regarding accessibility to district programs and activities. Mr. Larby?
So before you all today is policy ACE for first passage. This policy was brought before the policy subcommittee by school committee member Ms. Grant to look through this policy for non-inclusive language. And this policy and her bringing that to the table has actually led us to reconsider all our policies moving forward to make sure that we are being inclusive with our language. So as you can see before you, there are the changes are stricken out and replaced by the yellow highlighted. Some of those changes include changing the word disabled to differently able and the word facility to appropriately accessible buildings.
Then a motion to approve first passage by Mr. Charbonneau. It's been seconded by Ms. Grant. Ms. Bonillo.
Just a, under educational programs, second paragraph, second line, after the word course, take out the comma.
Can you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
Educational programs,
Mhm.
second paragraph, second line,
Mm-hmm.
where it says the word course, comma,
Mhm.
it's not needed.
Thank you. I think there was a question over here, Mr. Knight.
Can I ask why we haven't addressed this as a single amendment to all our policies rather than going through every single policy?
I'd like Mr. Larby or possibly legal counsel to weigh in. I had the same question. I know that this policy specifically, and I really appreciate Ms. Grant bringing the specific concerns about just accessible building and recreation area in this policy. But the idea of gender pronouns being made inclusive and differently able, is that something, as I said, Mr. Larby and legal counsel can weigh in? Can we just, as Mr. Knight said, do a blanket correct to our entire policy manual?
We could have to do a blanket correct. What we have been doing is looking at not just that in each policy. It's sort of, we've been using it as an opportunity to check each policy, see if there's anything else that needs to be changed. Policies that we consider to be larger or potential more significant changes, we've been tabling as we move through to give us more opportunity to review them. I mean, stylistically, you can sort of do like a Scrivener's correction for all of them, in which you make everything gender neutral. I still think we would most likely move forward with individual reviews of policies as sort of a matter of course.
I can see that being done in the future. If I may, how is this employment opportunities going to affect our union members who use seniority for bidding on different buildings? This language says that a differently abled employee will be able to be assigned to a differently handicap accessible building, as an example.
Dr. McWilliams, do you want to weigh? That was current policy, but
I'm not sure I even understand this question.
I do.
okay, Ms.
It
Miller.
also says in the, or whenever possible, reasonable accommodations will be provided. So if someone ends up on a 504 plan and we can't facilitate them at their building, we can offer them something else where we can.
Right.
And if we can't, we can make adjustments to the building they're in, if it's
appropriate. So now I understand the question, but that was already part of the policy. The only thing that changed was the actual language of the wording of, as it was stated, from disabled to differently abled, or there from his and her to there. So that was already part of the policy.
Has the union been
I was
talked
just
to
gonna
about
ask,
these changes?
Would you like our union representative to speak to this, Mr. Knight?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Beaupre.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Knight, for recognizing the union contract in these conversations about policy. I am present at the policy subcommittee meetings. I am an active member of the policy subcommittee. While there are some implications with regard to the transfer process within our contract, we do recognize the needs of our differently abled members. We have had, if you recall, we had a speech therapist who was employed by the Pawtucket School Department for many, many years, retired maybe about 4 years ago or so, who was wheelchair bound. And she had very specific buildings that she was able to work in. When there was a possibility that her position was going to be changed, there was conversation that was held within that group of people so that we ensured that she had the ability to work in the building. She would not have been able to, for example, work at Shea High School because it was not accessible to her. So, and I'm sure attorneys can talk about the ADA. However, we certainly recognize the abilities and the inabilities or the different abilities of our members, and we provide them those accommodations when necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, there's a motion on the table. There's no further discussion. Ms. Leslie, please take a roll call.
Ms. Pinolo.
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau.
Yes.
Ms. Grant.
Yes.
Mr. Knight.
Yes.
Mr. Larby.
Yes.
Mr. Marino. Ms. Doobie.
Yes. First passage carries unanimously. We are now on to approval of school committee policy, second passage. Are we taking these together, or we have ACEA section 504 policy? So a motion to take the two policies together by Mr. Charbonneau has been seconded by Ms. Grant. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
All right, so before you today, we have two policies for second passage. It's ACEA, Foundations and Basic Commitments, Section 504 policy, and policy AD, Foundation and Basic Commitments, called Beliefs and Commitments.
Motion approved both. Second.
Then a motion to approve both by Mr. Knight, it's been seconded by Mr. Charbonneau. Any discussion? Ms. Manolo.
I know the foundation's basic commitments and core beliefs are in policy, but because that is what we at the school department believe, shouldn't it be made noticeable to our parents, like on our website, so they know what our commitment is?
I believe it is on our, it's actually sitting by itself on our website. Am I correct, Ms. Liss? I believe it is. Under school committee, it's just the tab that says core beliefs and commitments.
Okay.
It is, yes, thank you.
No, I was saying more on the front page. We as a district believe. Just a thought.
Okay.
For future.
Okay.
One thing I do want to add about that policy in particular is that there was a little bit of conversation in our subcommittee group about whether or not us as a whole committee should re-explore this and see if this is still what we believe in and the commitments that we want to set forth.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, Ms. Leslie, please take a roll call.
Ms. Pinolo. Yes. Mr. Charbonneau.
Yes.
Ms. Grant.
Yes.
Mr. Knight.
Yes.
Mr. Larby.
Yes.
Mr. Marino.
Yes.
Ms. Doobie.
Yes. The second passage of the two policies carries unanimously. We are now on new business discussion action items. The first item here is approval of National Grid application submission to allow lighting audit to explore RIDE initiatives supporting lighting and fixture changes, school lighting accelerator program. And I know when I walked in, there was someone with a National Grid badge who came in right behind me, so we have someone here.
Good evening.
Take
The Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources is partnering with the Rhode Island Department of Education and School Building Authority as part of a facility equity initiative to combine resources to provide additional financing to public schools in need of LED lighting upgrades. My objective tonight is to get the permission of the school committee to sign a lighting system and sensors application. There's no obligation to signing this. This just allows National Grid to come in and do a no-cost audit on several buildings in which we have identified. I've brought Mr. Drummond here from National Grid who can speak on the lighting program, and if you may have any questions for him.
Been a motion to approve by Mr. Knight, seconded by Ms. Grant and Mr. Marino. would you like to explain this initiative?
Sure, Jerry Drummond, National Grid. So I support state agencies, municipalities, and public schools for National Grid for energy efficiency. We're doing a pilot program with 5 communities, Pawtucket being one of them, where the state energy office is going to pay whatever National Grid incentives don't cover 100%. We're going to audit 5 of your schools, again, no cost or obligation to the district. We'll select 1 or more buildings with the energy office and RIDE support and sign a memorandum of understanding between the state energy office and the school district. They'll help put this out to bid for you. They'll help evaluate it. They'll have a project manager involved. We've done this with about 75 state buildings. We did a pilot program with Calcutt Middle School in Central Falls. That project is currently under construction. So you want to see how we can do this with all of the roughly 100 schools that still don't have LEDs, this one being one above your head.
Okay.
So you could use LED lights and you could cut the electricity cost in half for this building for lighting it. So that's what we're trying to do with the remaining schools. So we're just asking permission to sign this and let Melissa and John help us in the building. We'll present our findings back to the school committee. But again, this is 100% paid for between National Grid incentives and the state energy office.
And what is the timeline for this?
We would do the audits in the month of December, come back to you with evaluation, put out a bid probably in the February, March timeframe. Hopefully, we would do installation over the summer so there'll be no impact on the students.
Mr. Knight and Ms. Glenn.
Buildings.
John, do you remember the 5 buildings?
5 buildings that we have chosen would be Little Elementary, Fallon, Curtis, Cunningham, and Jenks Middle School. We had to keep them within a certain square footage. I chose Jenks Middle School for several factors, one of them also being Slater Middle School has LED throughout all the corridors and the bathrooms already. I chose the Curtis specifically because of the old lighting in the building and the special needs that we have in that building, also similar to here. And I figured if I could get 4 of the elementary schools done, that would combine with the 3 we already have, that will only leave 3 outstanding in the system.
Ms. Grant.
I just want to say something. I do want to thank Mr. Cody, for bringing this up and putting this on the agenda. Myself, Chairwoman Dubey, Dr. Andrade, we had come to visit the classroom, the special needs classroom, Ms. Maham, Mrs. Betancourt, and we'd noticed one of the classrooms, the lights were off. And then we just kind of noticed, or speaking to the teachers, how much sensitivity some of the students do have that have needs. And, so the conversation did kind of come up that, this was something that could really benefit our special needs population. And again, it doesn't hurt to, help the costs, but I just want to thank you for, looking into that. I know you had mentioned, Dr. McElwain has mentioned it to you, and you spoke to Dr. Andrade. So I definitely think this is, really something, hopefully we can go through and have these changes made for the students.
Yes. Ms. Spinella.
So is it a MOU that needs to be signed or?
So the state energy office will send you a sample MOU. Providence has signed one, and Central Falls has signed one. We'll be asking you, and then West Warwick and Woonsocket as well to sign that MOU. You can run that by your legal counsel, make negotiations with the state. But it will be an MOU where the state will actually reimburse you, pay you. I don't want to talk about the pictures from the ride. It's a different process. I have no cartoons to show you, no offense to Mark. And Derek, I work with him very, very closely with all the districts. So.
Well,
so we'll send it to legal before.
And as you heard from Ms. Grant, we thank National Grid for this this program in general, because this really is going to make a difference in students' lives.
Right.
Mr. Charbonneau.
Mr. Drummond, you came before this committee once before.
I have been here several times.
And what was the result of the last trip here?
I'm trying to remember what I was in this room, I believe.
I thought it was at the central office, but I thought it was a similar program.
Right, similar office. You had to pay the balance. This time I made the deal even better. You're getting this all for free with state money. But yeah, you have taken advantage of some of our lighting programs in some of your buildings, all of your construction projects, or with Derek and his team, get as much reimbursement from National Grid. You are ratepayers, both electric and gas, you get as much rebate money back. So this is just an enhanced, because we haven't moved. I've got about 200 schools in the state to do LEDs. My goal is getting that last 100 done before the next 2 years. Before the rebates will run out in 2 years, is my guess.
So I guess what I'm asking is, the last time we approved this partnership, which schools got done? Or did they not get done? Or did it get?
We did some LEDs.
The LEDs that we did in our schools would have been connected to Green, Potter, portions of Slater, and Shea, and currently Furman. The difference is, over the past, when we've tried to do LED programs, the fixtures were free, but the installation wasn't. So that's where the cost incurred for us. And in this case, this sounds from Jerry, and what he told us is that everything would be paid for, including they're actually going to guide us along the way. But I wanted to get everybody involved early on so that when he comes back with his audit, we can go over it with everybody and discuss what needs to be done. And because I know that if we do something like this, it impacts summer programs on the schools that we pick. So everybody needs as much time as possible. So.
Well, and John, I trust that you will be mindful with Melissa that we're going to have some shovel-ready projects going as well. So we don't want to be doing LED lights at a school we're doing roof work at, or so on and so forth.
Correct. We've got a lot of projects going on this summer. So until we find out about the other money that Mario talked about, the 2.5 million, and determine where that's going to be, then we'll be able to get everything all together. Because I know what you're saying. We don't want to be tripping over each other.
Right. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, Ms. Leslie, please take a roll call.
Ms. Finello? Yes. Mr. Charbonneau?
Yes.
Ms. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Larby?
Yes.
Mr. Marino? Ms. Doobie?
Yes. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. Happy holidays. Our next item is Unified High School Conceptual Design Site Investigation Proposal SLAM. Mr. Charbonneau, are you taking this?
Sure. Okay. So before you is a proposal from SLAM for some site investigation at the former McCoy Stadium site. As part of our ongoing process from a unified high school subcommittee, we have looked at and discussed with SLAM renderings and site work that needs to be done to ensure that we can, in fact, build the building to the size and scope that we need it to be in order to house our high schools. So before you is a proposal for $91,350. That is part of our due diligence work on the site itself. There will be borings and a report delivered back to this committee, as well as the Unified High School Subcommittee, as to what's under the ground there and the platforms and/or foundation structures that we're going to need to use to build the Unified High School. It's critical work that we need to invest in up front to make sure that parcel of land can sustain a building of that size. So it is the recommendation of the Unified High School Subcommittee that the full school committee approve the SLAM proposal for $91,350 for site work at the proposed Unified High School site.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Is that a motion to approve the investigation proposal by SLAM by Ms. Vanola? It's been seconded by Mr. Larby and Mr. Marino. Mr. Knight.
Is this a little bit more than we originally thought it was going to be? I thought we spoke on $80,000.
It is not. I believe the Unified High School Subcommittee has been diligent in looking at options and then presenting to this committee. The initial one was, I believe, in the $40,000 price range for SLAM to provide some renderings, architectural renderings. As we get further down the conversation on the Unified High School, the next step is, can the site support the renderings that we've been presented with? And that's where this comes into play. SLAM has assured me and assured the Unified High School Committee that this $91,000 spend will answer that question for us once and for all. And they're willing to stand by that, yes, the land can support it, or no, it can't.
Ms. Grant?
If we do approve this evening, when would this take place? It looks like, it takes quite a bit of time for them to do it.
So, great question, Ms. Grant. Fuss and O'Neill would be the contractor. They're the same company that had provided some level of site work in years past for the city at the same site. This will be a more extensive and comprehensive site evaluation. It's going to take them 10 to 12 weeks. They are ready to start on this committee's approval, is what SLAM has indicated to us. Derek, is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. The one time which we've only, so very small, technically it says 11 to 13 weeks, but essentially they'd like to go now, so then we're looking towards General Assembly approval and getting ready for a bond referendum. We can also say that we understand what that's going to mean in terms of site.
Mr. Knight?
Okay, this is going down to 50 feet, if I read correctly.
I believe it was 50 or 75 feet.
I thought it was deeper than 50, but I saw 50 here.
50 feet, you're correct, Mr. Knight.
Is that going to be deep enough?
And again, as we've had discussions in the Unified High School Subcommittee, that I asked that specific question of SLAM and their principals here, that will this report tell us that yes, we can build there, or no, we can't? And they assured me that it will. The issue is that in the very high level budget projections for the Unified High School, there is a bucket of about $20 million for site work. This $91,000 spend is going to tell us if that $20 million bucket needs to be adjusted upwards, or if it can be pulled down, which, you know, when you're talking $20 million for site work, an adjustment one way or the other is significant to the overall price.
Thank you. I see no further discussion. I know that since we have had several meetings that have started late because of your ad hoc committee, I know the amount of work that you are putting into that committee, and I thank you for bringing this to us. Ms. Leslie, please take a roll call.
Ms. Doobie?
Oh, yes,
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Ms. Manolo?
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau?
Yes.
Ms. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Larby?
Yes.
Mr. Marino?
Yes.
Ms. Doobie?
Yes. Motion carries unanimously. Our next item is approval of private school services vendor and MOU. Okay, I was going to say.
Yes.
Ms.
So we have before you a contract for your approval for a 3-year contract and agreement with Catapult. As you know, Pawtucket School Department proposal came in, that was Catapult. It's would like to note that they have been providing the services for many years, and this is a proposal for the 3 fiscal years 2021 to 22, 22 to 23, 23 to 24, with a 2-year optional renewal in the fiscal years 24, 25, and 25, 26.
Motion approved. Second.
Then a motion to approve by Mr. Sherman, has been seconded by Mr. Marino and Ms. Bonello. Any discussion?
Just one.
Ms. Bonello, Ms.
No,
and Mr.
please.
Charbonneau.
I just wanted to know what their current, because they're going up $4,000 a year. I was curious if you knew what their
What do you mean going up? Who is going
Well,
up?
contract
Oh, as far as,
cost.
right. So if you look,
About 4,000. Do you know
Right.
what we're paying now?
yes, so the way it works is and as a matter of fact, that's a good point, because the contract will come each year, even though we're approving, if you approve for 3 years, you really have to look at it annually, because every spring when the title grants come out, you have to consider the population and the population that is attending those schools, and they use the October enrollment from the previous year, and so your pupil is tied to those particular students in a private school who are low income. So it will change, But I will note that the hourly rate is going to stay flat, as you see over the 3 years, and that was something that both Sarah and Melissa were able to negotiate with them, which was a good thing, because the original proposal that we received, which was the only proposal, did indicate an increase, and they did make some contact with them and say, you know, we would like to have you at that flat fee. So as you can see, you have the difference would be, and actually, I don't know if we could have Sarah speak to it, because I know she worked specifically on this with Melissa.
Mr. Nola, would you like that?
Yeah.
Sarah, could you speak specifically to the increase in each year?
Absolutely. So every year when we receive our title funds, as Dr. McWilliam explained, it's done on a per pupil allocation basis. So in order for the district to share its proportionate amount with the private schools, we take their enrollment from the previous October. And so based on the fluctuations due to COVID in our private school setting, these projections show the increase, assuming that those private schools will have an increased enrollment every year. These figures could change. They could be lower than what you see in the projection, but we make the projection based on the last 3-year trend. So over the last 3 years, we've trended with an increase of about $4,000 for each of our schools, and we serve 9 schools.
Sarah, is it common that we would go out to bid and only get one?
Yes, particularly after COVID, the number of agencies who are servicing schools in person has decreased dramatically. You also have to have buy-in from your local agencies in terms of private schools as to who the vendor is that they would like to provide the service. So there is a consultation process that we go through every spring with our agencies. And much like us, our private schools feel that in-person learning and in-person tutoring is the way that they'd like to go.
Thank you.
Okay, no further discussion?
Oh, did you have anything else?
I was saying thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Ms. Cornmarsh. Ms. Let's please take a roll call.
Ms. Manolo.
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau.
Yes.
Ms. Grant.
Yes.
Mr. Knight.
Yes.
Mr. Larby.
Yes.
Mr. Marino.
Yes.
Ms. Doobie.
Yes, motion carries unanimously.
Motion adjourned?
Second.
Then a motion was adjourned by Ms. Moreno. It's been seconded by Ms. Grant. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We are adjourned at 8:05.